The glint of silver caught the light before anything else. Caleb's hands froze mid-air, the gesture unfinished as his gaze locked on the Apache Queen leaning forward across the worn wooden table. Resting against her chest was something that had no right to still exist. It couldn't still exist. He had buried it himself, pressed into the hard earth behind the ruins of their burned-out cabin 15 years gone. And yet here it was. The same careful twisting silverwork, the same trio of turquoise stones, set like falling drops of water. Even the small scar etched along its lower edge, the mark his father's plow had left during harvest, was unmistakable. Her dark eyes lingered on his face with a sharpness that felt almost knowing, as though she could see something in him he himself could not. Around them the air thickened. The crowd inside the post seemed to hold its breath, every soul waiting for Caleb to recognize something beyond the piece of jewelry. "You look like you've seen a spirit, rancher," she murmured, her fingers brushing the pendant. But instead of the defensive clutch he expected, her touch was gentle, reverent, protective. The whole trading post fell still. The groan of old timber was the only sound left. Even the warriors who had come with her had gone motionless, their faces unreadable but watchful. This wasn't the start of a standoff. It felt like the closing of a long unspoken truth. Caleb opened his mouth, ready to demand, to accuse, but the words stuck in his throat when her expression softened. Recognition stirred in her features, followed by something startling. Relief. "Tell me," she breathed, leaning closer across the table. "What name did your mother call you when you were a child?" The question struck him like a blow. His mother's secret name for him, Little Wolf, was something she'd whispered only in hushed tones, during fireside tales of distant warriors. A name no living person could possibly know. "How could you?" he began, but she lifted a weathered hand to silence him. "The necklace," Aiyana said at last, her voice threaded with sorrow and wonder. "It was never truly yours to lose, was it?" The post seemed to transform into a crypt, silence weighing heavy on every corner. Even Marcus Drummond, the treacherous broker who had orchestrated this gathering, had retreated to the far wall. His arrogant smirk dissolved into something closer to dread. Caleb's chest constricted. That necklace had been his mother's dearest possession, the one bright fragment of beauty in their relentless life. She had worn it daily until the fever consumed her, pressing it to her chest as she whispered fragments of family history she longed to keep alive. And now this Apache woman spoke as though she had heard those same stories, as if she had lived them too. "That necklace belonged to my mother," Caleb said at last, his voice unsteady. "She died wearing it." Aiyana's face remained calm, yet the atmosphere shifted. The warriors shifted too, their hands drifting toward weapons, not in threat but in readiness, in protection. "Yes," she answered quietly. "She did die wearing it, I know, because I was the one who placed it around her neck before she left us." Her words rang in the silence, echoing in Caleb's bones. The ground seemed to tilt beneath him, his world built on sand now sliding away. Before he could form a reply, the sound of horses approached, their hooves drumming closer through the thin plank walls. The pounding of many hooves shook the ground, growing louder with every heartbeat. Aiyana's head whipped toward the sound, her features hardening with resolve. "We're out of time," she said sharply. "They've tracked us." The thunder of horses closed in, mingling with harsh shouts and barked orders. Dust swirled against the window panes as Caleb caught sight of riders circling the trading post, rifles raised and ready. "At least a dozen men, maybe more. Drummond," a voice roared from outside. "We know you're in there with those savages. Come out or we'll tear the place apart." Marcus Drummond pressed his back against the wall as if it might swallow him whole, his complexion drained of color. "I didn't tell them," he babbled. "I swear on my mother's grave I didn't." "Your mother's grave?" Aiyana rose slowly to her full height, her tone slicing through his trembling excuses. "The same mother you claimed was Apache when you sold me this necklace last month?" Caleb felt the ground shift beneath him again. "You bought it from him?" 3 weeks ago, Aiyana said evenly, her eyes never leaving Drummond. "He swore it was his dead Apache mother's and begged me for money to bury her properly." Drummond's face collapsed into a mask of shame and desperation. "Look, I just needed the silver. Times are lean. That piece was worth more than most men earn in a year. I found it fair when I cleared out the Whitmore place after my family died." "You robbed their graves," Caleb finished for him. his voice quiet but lethal. The realization twisted like a knife. Drummond had been there after the fever, offering sympathy, helping with the burials. And all the while he'd planned to return and strip the dead of anything valuable. "This necklace has belonged to my people for generations," Aiyana said, her voice trembling with contained fury. "My grandmother wore it. My mother wore it. And when my sister chose to leave our people for the white man's world, she carried it away with her." The word sister lingered in the air, heavy as smoke. "That's impossible," Caleb whispered. "My mother was Anna White Crow," Aiyana pressed on, relentless. "She changed her name to Anne when she married your father. She told everyone she came from the East to bury the truth of who she was." The voices outside grew sharper, men arguing whether to wait or storm the building. Metallic clicks of cocked rifles punctuated the tension. Yet all of it felt far away compared to the storm breaking in Caleb's chest. His mother, Apache. This woman, her sister. His entire life built on a lie. "She never told me," Caleb rasped, the words scraping from deep within him. "She couldn't," Aiyana replied, her anger softening into a sorrowful compassion. "Not in that world. Not as the wife of a white rancher. If she had spoken, it would have destroyed everything she tried to build." A sharp crash shattered the moment, glass exploding at the back of the building. Heavy boots slammed onto the floorboards. "Time's up," a voice thundered. "Everybody down." Aiyana moved instantly, her body flowing like water into position before Caleb. Her warriors followed, forming a protective ring without hesitation. "There's more you must know," she said urgently, her hand closing over the silver pendant. "Something your mother made me swear to tell you if we ever met again." The back door burst inward, splintering under the force. Armed men surged through the opening like a flood breaking a dam. Their leader strode forward, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair, cold eyes, and a rifle leveled at the room. "Well, well," he drawled, his gaze fixing on Aiyana. "If it ain't the Apache Queen herself. Been hunting you for weeks, woman. Sheriff Garrett." Drummond gasped, his relief pouring out in a rush. "Thank God you're here." "These savages tried to rob me. Tried to steal my goods." Drummond's voice cracked with desperation. "Shut your lying mouth, Marcus," Garrett snapped, never once breaking his stare from Aiyana. "We already know about your little grave robbing scheme. Been following a trail of stolen silver across 3 territories." Caleb felt a dark satisfaction at seeing Drummond's face collapse into ruin, but the feeling soured almost immediately. If Garrett had been tracing the necklace's path, then Aiyana was now in danger simply for wearing it. "That necklace there," one of Garrett's men said, pointing straight at the silver and turquoise resting against Aiyana's chest, "matches the description from the Whitmore gravesite. Don't it?" Garrett's smile was as sharp and cruel as a drawn knife. "Looks like we didn't just catch the thief, boys. We caught the buyer, too." Aiyana stood motionless, her warriors flanking her like carved stone, but Caleb could see the swift, quiet reckoning in her eyes. They were boxed in, outnumbered 3-1, penned inside a fragile wooden shell with nowhere to run. "That necklace was stolen from my family," Aiyana said evenly. "I reclaimed it from a man who plundered the dead." "Your family?" Garrett barked a laugh, harsh and scornful. "Woman, that trinket was dug out of a white woman's grave. What business would your people have with civilized jewelry?" The insult settled thickly in the air, as acrid as smoke. Caleb saw Aiyana's jaw clench, fury barely contained. Before she could speak, he stepped forward. "Because that white woman was her sister." The words dropped into the silence like stones breaking the surface of still water. Every eye in the room snapped to him. Garrett's swagger faltered, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Boy," the sheriff said slowly, "you don't know what kind of nonsense you're spouting." "Her name was Anna White Crow," Caleb pressed on, his voice gaining strength with each syllable. "She became Ann Whitmore when she married my father. That necklace came from her family, her Apache family, long before it ever touched a white grave." Drummond made a strangled sound, shaking his head. "That's not possible. Anne was from Pennsylvania. She told everyone what she needed to." Aiyana cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. "She sacrificed her name, her blood, her very self to protect her new family. My sister gave up everything, even her truth, to keep you safe." Garrett's face hardened into cold stone. "Even if that fairy tale's true, it don't change what I see. You're holding stolen goods. You're shielding known criminals. He signaled to his men who began to spread out, closing around the Apache warriors like tightening nooses. The room vibrated with the taut silence of drawn bows ready to snap. There is still one more thing, Aiyana said urgently, her hand resting on the pendant at her throat. Before she died, Anna made me swear an oath. Her gaze fixed on Caleb. An oath about you. Caleb's heart pounded in his ears. What oath? He asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. She made me promise that if she ever fell, if you were left alone in this world, I would. A gunshot split the air like a lightning strike, the report crashing through the trading post, not from within but outside on the street. Another shot followed, then another, until the air shook with the crack of rifles and the shouts of men. Caleb darted a glance through the window. More riders were thundering in, but these men wore no badges. Boss, one of Garrett's deputies yelled from the doorway. We got company. Looks like half the damned militia just rode into town. The riders swept down the main street like a storm breaking loose, horses pounding hard enough to rattle the ground, clouds of dust boiling up until the afternoon sun burned a dirty orange. From the shattered windows of the post, Caleb counted at least 20 soldiers, all carrying government rifles, faces set in the grim certainty of men who believed their violence was righteous. What in blazes? Garrett cursed, torn between the Apache inside and the armed wave outside. Nobody summoned militia backup, he growled. Maybe they didn't wait for an invitation, one deputy muttered, his face dark. Gunfire outside quickened, windows in neighboring buildings exploding outward, panicked horses shrieking in the street. The sharp volley of rifles ricocheted through the timber walls. This isn't just about silver, Aiyana said softly, locking eyes with Caleb through the chaos. Militia doesn't ride this hard for grave goods. She was right. The territorial militia carried a reputation carved from blood, ruthless in Apache campaigns, unbending, merciless. They never bargained, never spared, never paused to ask who was guilty and who was not. We need to get out, Garrett muttered, his earlier swagger dissolving. Before they decide we're all painted with the same brush. But even as he spoke, the porch outside thundered with boots. A new voice rang through the broken doorway, young but edged with command, the kind of authority born from being obeyed. This is Captain Morrison of the Territorial Militia. Everyone inside, throw down your weapons and come out with your hands high. Drummond collapsed to his knees, a whimper tearing out of him. Please, I'm just a traitor. I didn't do anything wrong. Shut your mouth, Garrett snapped, though his own hands trembled against the rifle stock. Aiyana's warriors closed tighter around her, their grim faces set like stone. They knew too well what militia justice meant for Apache caught this far beyond the reservation lines. The promise, Caleb said quickly, pushing closer to Aiyana despite the rifles sighted on them both. What did my mother make you swear? Her eyes searched his, measuring time against truth. Outside, Morrison's orders rang out, positioning his men like a tightening noose. She made me swear, Aiyana said at last, voice steady, that if you were ever cast out, if the white world ever turned on you as it did on her, I would take you home. To your true family, the words slammed into him. His mother had foreseen this. She had known he might one day have to choose between the life she tried to build and the blood she came from. Home, Caleb whispered. Your grandfather still lives, Aiyana pressed urgently. Your mother's father. He never gave up waiting for her, never stopped believing she would return. 30 seconds. Morrison's voice thundered from outside. Then we're coming through that door hard. Garrett's men inched toward the windows, hunting for escape where none existed. The Apache stood unmoving, yet every muscle in their bodies was taut as a drawn bowstring. There's a way out, Drummond blurted suddenly, his voice shrill with terror. Behind the storeroom. Leads to the old mine shaft. I used it to move things I didn't want folks seeing. You mean stolen goods, Garrett shot back, sneering. Does it matter? Drummond snapped, through the cracked window. Caleb saw the militia digging in, soldiers crouched behind wagons and feed barrels flipped into barricades, rifles catching the sun like promises of death. 20 seconds, Morrison barked. Aiyana turned to Caleb, her expression weighted with years of truths unspoken, choices deferred. Your mother knew this day would come, she said, her voice carrying like a verdict. She told me you would one day stand at the line between her world and ours. Between safety and truth. Caleb's chest tightened. Choose what? He asked, though deep inside he already knew. Choose who you really are, Aiyana said simply. The front door shattered inward beneath the pounding of rifle butts and booted feet. Morrison's command thundered above the chaos. Nobody move! But Aiyana was already in motion, seizing Caleb's hand and pulling him toward the rear. Choose now. The hidden passage behind Drummond's storeroom reeked of dust, earth, and old buried secrets. Caleb crawled into the narrow dark, guided by the faint scrape of Aiyana's movements just ahead. Behind them, gunfire erupted, mingling with furious shouts as the militia realized their prey had slipped away. Keep moving, Aiyana urged in a harsh whisper. The shaft opens onto the canyon. The tunnel sloped downward, stone tearing Caleb's palms and knees as he scrambled forward. His thoughts churned as violently as the gunfire echoing behind him. His mother, Apache, a family he had never been told existed, and here he was, fleeing through a smuggler's tunnel with the very people he'd once been taught to hate. The passage spilled into a cavern where shafts of sunlight pierced through cracks in the rock above. Aiyana's warriors were already waiting, their horses stamping nervously, having reached the place by another route. How long have you known? Caleb demanded as they stepped into the light. About my mother, I mean. Since the day she left, Aiyana answered, inspecting her rifle. Anna was my younger sister. Her choice to marry your father, to live as a white woman, split our family in two. Why didn't you try to find her? Caleb pressed. Aiyana's gaze grew distant, shadowed. She made us swear not to. Said contact with her old life would destroy the one she was trying to build. We honored that oath for 20 years. The thunder of hooves snapped them all alert. But it wasn't the militia. They saw Apache riders sweeping into the canyon from the north, dust trailing like banners in the sun. Reinforcements, Aiyana explained at his bewildered look. Your grandfather sent them. He has waited for news of Anna's family ever since word reached him of her death. Grandfather, Caleb repeated, the word feeling alien on his tongue. Joseph White Crow, Aiyana said firmly. He's why I reclaimed the necklace from Drummond. It was meant to return home, to its rightful family. One of the new arrivals dismounted, his weathered face taut with urgency. The militia has the town surrounded, he reported. They're tearing through every building. Morrison is offering a bounty for the Apache Queen. Aiyana's jaw set like stone. How long? Not long. They're sweeping methodically. And worse, they've brought a tracker. Someone who reads Apache sign. Caleb's chest constricted. Even if they escaped to the wilds, they would be hunted like animals. The militia never relented when chasing Apaches. There may be another way, Caleb said at last, his voice low but steady. Every gaze turned toward him. In the fractured light of the cavern, the silver pendant around Aiyana's throat shimmered, a symbol of everything that had brought him here. I could go back, he said. Tell them I was taken, held hostage. I slipped away when the shooting started. Absolutely not, Aiyana cut in at once. They'll never buy that. Why not? I'm white. I own land. Sheriff Garrett knows my name. The bitter irony of the admission landed like a stone. If he claimed innocence, they'd be eager to accept it. And then what? One of the warriors demanded. You live the rest of your days pretending none of this happened. Caleb's eyes flicked from Aiyana to the pendant resting against her breast, to the kin he'd only just discovered. The decision weighed on him, pressing down like a physical weight. Maybe that's what my mother would have wanted, he murmured. No. Aiyana's voice was firm. Anna regretted leaving every day. She told me so in her last letter. Letter? Caleb's chest seized. What letter? Before she could answer, the canyon filled with the thunder of approaching hooves. The militia had picked up their trail. Dust rolled in on the wind and rifle cracks shredded the air as mounted soldiers poured in from both directions. Captain Morrison's orders ricocheted over the rock faces, directing men to form a ring and close the noose. Take the high trail, Aiyana barked, pointing to a narrow switchback that climbed the canyon wall. Move toward the old crossing. Her people began to move, but Caleb could see the trap closing. Men crouched like sentries on the rim, sharpshooters placed with cold precision, cutting off the obvious paths of escape. The letter, Caleb shouted, bullets pinging stone around them. What did she write? Aiyana fumbled inside her leather vest and produced a folded sheet, edges browned with time. She sent this 3 months before she died. Said she'd made a terrible mistake and wanted to come home. Caleb's hands trembled as he opened the paper. His mother's handwriting, so familiar, ran across the page. and the sentences rearranged the world he'd known. My beloved sister, I have lived a lie for 20 years, and it has poisoned everything I tried to build. My husband drinks away our land, and my son grows thinking his blood is shame instead of strength. I want to bring Caleb to meet his grandfather before it is too late. I want him to know who he really is. She was coming back, Caleb whispered. The fever took her before she could make the trip, Aiyana said, ducking as another volley rattled the cavern. But she made me swear to watch over you if anything happened. The irony cut him raw. His mother had raised him to fear the Apache while secretly planning to return him to them. She had died intending to lift the very veil she'd lived behind. Surrender now and nobody else has to die. Morrison's voice boomed from the rim. Aiyana's warriors hugged the shelter of boulders and returned fire, but the odds were brutal. There's more, Aiyana said, voice taut with grief. Your mother didn't plan a visit. She planned for you to take your grandfather's place when he was gone. Leader? Caleb echoed, stunned. In our way, leadership can pass through daughters to their children. Joseph White Crow had no sons. Anna was his chosen heir before she left. That right falls to you now. Caleb stared, the meaning unfurling like a map. This was not merely about a stolen ornament or a buried secret. It was the future of a people. So that's why you came, he said. Yes. Aiyana's eyes held his. And that's why the militia fears you. A half-white man who owns land and speaks both worlds, that terrifies them more than any war party. A voice cut through the gunfire. Drummond, who had somehow slipped up to the canyon rim, was shouting. There she is. The Queen's got the Whitmore boy. Morrison's answer was ice. Take them alive if you can. If not, bring them down. We can't let this spread. The final clash pressed in. Caleb folded his mother's letter with trembling precision and tucked it against his chest beneath his shirt. Around him, the firefight deepened into desperate, grinding noise as the militia tightened its cordon. Yet something inside Caleb had shifted irrevocably. As Caleb read the letter's words, the fear that had gripped his life for as long as he could remember began to dissolve. In its place came a startling clarity, sharper than anything he had ever known. I'm going out there, he said, his voice calm. Resolved? That's suicide, one of Aiyana's warriors warned sharply. No. Caleb checked the weight of his rifle, though he kept it low. It's the only chance we have. He stepped from cover, hands raised but weapon still visible. The rattle of gunfire faltered, then stilled as both sides recognized him. Captain Morrison! Caleb's voice carried across the canyon. I'm Caleb Whitmore. I want to speak. Stay put, son, Morrison barked back. We're here to pull you out. I don't need rescuing, Caleb answered, his words echoing in the sudden quiet. I need you to listen. Deliberately, unhurried, he walked into the open space between the two forces. Behind him he heard Aiyana's breath catch, but she didn't stop him. The woman you're hunting, she is my aunt, Caleb declared, his voice ringing off the stone walls. The necklace she wears belonged to my mother, her sister. My mother was Apache. The confession cracked the air like a rifle shot. Soldiers glanced at each other uneasily, rifles wavering. That's not possible, Morrison called, but his confidence faltered. Marcus Drummond robbed the graves of my family and sold their possessions. Caleb pressed on, steady as he advanced. That necklace had been in my mother's people for generations. Aiyana bought it back to return it home. That was not theft, it was restoration. The boy's been brainwashed. Drummond's shrill voice carried from the rim above. Don't listen to him! But Caleb saw doubt spreading like water through dry soil. These were militiamen, farmers' sons, fathers themselves, not professional Indian killers. They knew frontier life was never simple. My mother lived 20 years in hiding, Caleb continued, now close enough to see the lines of wear across Morrison's face. She died regretting the lie. I won't repeat her mistake. Morrison's rifle dipped slightly. What are you saying, son? I'm saying Aiyana came in peace. She carried family property, not weapons. The only violence began when you surrounded us. If there's blood spilled here, Captain, it will be because you chose war over truth. The canyon hushed, the wind whispering through the stone. Caleb stopped 10 paces from Morrison, near enough for the captain to see the conviction burning in his eyes. You have a choice, Caleb said quietly. You can be remembered as the man who stopped needless bloodshed, or as the one who lit the fuse to a war. Behind Morrison, soldiers began lowering their weapons, uncertainty spreading like a tide. Finally, Morrison's voice rang out. Stand down. But from the rim, Drummond's desperate cry broke through. "No! You don't understand. That necklace is worth a fortune. I need—" The crack of a rifle silenced him forever. His body toppled from the rocks, landing in the dust with a dull, final thud. 3 months later, Caleb stood on a high ridge overlooking the valley where his grandfather's people had built their winter camp. The silver pendant now hung against his chest, not as plunder, but as a symbol of truth and of leadership earned, true to his word. Captain Morrison had filed a report that framed the entire affair as grave robbery and fraud, not an Apache attack. The territorial government, eager to avoid an expensive conflict, had quietly accepted the story. More importantly, Morrison spread word through military channels. Caleb Whitmore was no outlaw, no sympathizer, but a rightful landowner reclaiming his family's legacy. In a world balanced on perception, the distinction meant everything. "Your mother would be proud," Aiyana said, joining him at the overlook. "Would she?" Caleb asked softly. "I've stepped into the very life she thought she was shielding me from." "No," Aiyana corrected gently. "You've embraced the life she secretly wanted you to have." Below them, the camp stirred with evening preparations. Children darted between dwellings. Elders sat by steady fires recounting stories. Families bustled with the simple rhythm of life. It was a vision of a people most settlers never witnessed. Apache not as enemies but as kin. "Joseph wants to see you," Aiyana added, meaning their grandfather. "He's ready to begin the formal transfer of leadership." Caleb touched the pendant through his shirt. At 83, Joseph Whitecrow remained wise and commanding, though age had begun to sap his strength. The transition could not wait much longer. "The other leaders, do they accept me?" Caleb asked. Aiyana's eyes held steady. "More than accept. They're hopeful," Aiyana said softly. "You bring something our people have never had before. The power to meet the white world on equal ground, not as beggars." And it was true. In the weeks after the canyon standoff, Caleb had begun using his land deeds and his recognized status in the territory to negotiate with ranchers and officials. The progress was small but undeniable. Written agreements that allowed Apache families to remain without the constant shadow of eviction. "There's something else," Aiyana added, producing a folded document. It arrived yesterday from the governor's office. Caleb opened the letter, scanning the official script. His eyes widened. The territorial government was offering to recognize their winter encampment as a permanent settlement, complete with legal protections and trading rights. "They mean this?" he asked. "As much as politicians mean anything," Aiyana replied with a wry smile. "But yes, your grandfather believes this may be our best chance at lasting peace." That night, seated beside the tribal council around the great fire, Caleb thought of his mother's last words, her regrets, her yearning to return, her wish that he might know his true kin. She had hidden her identity to protect him, never realizing that embracing it might have been the greater shield. The silver pendant glimmered in the firelight as Caleb leaned forward. In the faces around him he saw not strangers, not the imagined foes of frontier myths, but family, uncles, aunts, cousins who had carried the memory of Anna Whitecrow and waited decades for her son. "My mother raised me to fear who I was," Caleb said, his voice steady. "But you've shown me how to take pride in it. When I lead you, I will carry both worlds forward, together." Murmurs of approval rippled through the council. Joseph Whitecrow, his grandfather, nodded with deep satisfaction. Beyond the circle of flames, the night sky stretched wide, ancient stars bearing silent witness as they had for generations. In that vastness, Caleb felt the truth settle within him. The timid rancher who once accused an Apache queen of theft was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned the simplest, bravest truth of all. Sometimes the greatest act of defiance is choosing to embrace exactly who you are.